name's Nick, and my company's mission is to decentralize the internet, which at first may seem unnecessary. After all, that's kind of the point of the internet, isn't it? Millions of machines located all over the world, running sites, apps, backend services. So, yeah? How's this? Is this any better? Okay, cool. Or I can just project to the back seats. Right, so the internet's already decentralized, right? Well, yes, sort of. From an architectural perspective, totally. There's millions of machines located all over the world, running apps, sites, backend services. But from an ownership perspective, not so much, right? Because who owns all those servers? Increasingly, it's three companies: Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, with their AWS, GCP, and Azure offerings. As an example, a recent CIO survey by Credit Suisse asked CIOs, who's your cloud vendor of choice? And Amazon came back at 48%, Microsoft at 33%, and Google plus IBM actually with 11% between them. That's 92% market share in the enterprise. Okay? When you go down market a bit, the numbers change slightly, but the pattern of concentrated ownership remains. And it's my thesis today that that is a bad thing. That concentrated ownership of a commodity that is indirectly or directly used by literal billions of people is bad. Bad because, number one, it results in artificially high prices for compute. Number two, because those high prices are a tax on society as a whole. Number three, because it stifles innovation. And there's a number four. Those are the known knowns. There's a number four. There's a known unknown. And what's it going to look like in the future? What's it going to look like in 3 years? 10 years, a generation down the line, as our technological dependency increases, as life without cloud becomes increasingly impossible to visualize? Is it a good idea for three companies to control it all? Unsurprisingly, I don't think so, right? And fortunately, there's a reasonable alternative, and I'll get to that in a minute. But before that, let me just make my sort of obligatory don't hate the player comment. Listen, Amazon invented the public cloud, right? If it weren't for them, we'd be running stuff out of a closet like we did in 2001, working real hard for like 90% uptime, okay? And applying virtualization to Amazon's over-provisioning problem, it's freaking genius, right? I just think of Werner Vogel's in a board meeting, like taking shit for the umpteenth time, right, about IT costs, right? And explaining patiently over and over and over that you have to provision for the peak, even though the peak doesn't usually happen, finally like throwing his hat down and be like, fuck it. We will just rent the servers like Blockbuster rents the videos, right? Good idea. And fast forward to today, AWS has a $20 billion run rate, Blockbuster, not so much. And AWS basically funds the rest of Amazon, right? And as far as I know, they play by the rules, right? They're doing everything legally. They innovated and they executed beautifully. So where do I get off hating on their success? Not to mention the success of Google and Microsoft, which is considerable. It's because that very success has led to an oligopoly, which is where we're at now. But it's not the first time. It's not the first time that innovation and commercial success in American history have resulted in ungrateful shits like me calling for change. Back at the beginning of an earlier economic revolution, captains of industry built entire segments, right? Companies grew to control these industries: petroleum, railroads, steel. They made the modern world literally possible, and in doing so, made men like Rockefeller. Oop, nope, not you, that's what happens later. Come on, Rockefeller. Oh, there we go. Love this picture, by the way. Doesn't he look sinister? Carnegie, Vanderbilt, these extraordinarily wealthy individuals were titans of industry, but they were also robber barons. And they were robber barons because, amongst other things, they were ruthlessly anti-competitive, right? Those tactics were also legal, though, at the time, until government began taking action. Starting in the late 19th century anyways, they began to promote legislation and take regulatory action to promote fair competition for the benefit of consumers. Now, people of goodwill can disagree about the effectiveness and desirability of government regulation. But the basic principle is broadly and intuitively appealing. Economic competition is beneficial for society, and consolidation of economic control when it comes to the basic necessities of modern life is not. But there's something ungrateful about it. Again, Like, here these guys are, they founded and then built entire industries from nothing. The personification of entire industries that built our way of life, the reason we're sitting here enjoying tikka masala. Right? They made the modern American state possible. They made many people wealthy. They made others, larger number, well off. And they lifted many, many more out of poverty, enabling them to make a decent living, provide for their families, send their children to college, get an education, and leave the mills and their parents' life of toil behind them. Right? And it was like, thanks, nicely done, but too nicely, so we're going to take that back now. And we do it because it's the right thing to do for society. Right? And because American values are not generally compatible with that kind of power being held in the hands of an unelected elite. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the role of organized labor in all this. Okay? Carnegie's factory workers weren't able to send their kids to college because of his generosity. Right? They fought, the workers fought, suffered for wages and working conditions that lifted them out of poverty. So in this historic example that I'm making here, the reaction to consolidated economic control is social unrest, running street battles, and vigorous government regulation. What if there was another way, though? And again, I'll get to that in a minute, but first, let's look at my claims. 1, consolidated control results in artificially high prices. Those prices are a tax, they stifle innovation, and it's getting worse. Okay, first, artificially high prices. Good data is actually hard to come by on this one. But we can get close. Good data is hard to come by because the margins earned by the big providers on raw compute itself are pretty impossible to get at. Each platform has a ton of services, and pricing is both convoluted, you ever use the pricing calc? Yeah, and idiosyncratic to each individual vendor. But we can understand the magnitude. Q4 2017, AWS earned $5.1 billion. Microsoft Cloud, $5.3 billion. Note that does include Office 365. And GCP had its first billion-dollar quarter, but yeah, a lot of money, but they're big companies. They have a lot of customers. So there's nothing wrong with those numbers on the face of them. Digging a bit deeper, though, we see margins of 26% for AWS, and that's compared to 1.4% for the rest of AWS, right? And Azure saw revenue growth of 98%, with a commercial cloud gross margin of 55%. You know, pedantic note, the AWS number is operating margin. The Azure number is 55%. That's actually gross margin. Okay, this is not rapacious, but these are healthy margins, especially given large-scale investment in hyperscale data centers that's going on right now. And in Amazon's case, again, they're supporting the entire enterprise. The rest of Amazon is living on AWS revenue right now. Okay, we ran our own numbers. We built our own at Akash. We built our own hypothetical cloud on a spreadsheet. Not yet. And our numbers align with theirs. This is a money-making business, for sure, especially if you run a machine for more than 2 years, and especially if you factor in economies of scale that the large providers enjoy. Okay. Next. These costs are a tax on society. It's an obvious follow-on, but it's an important argument to make. Because who uses cloud compute? Well, direct users include technology companies, many of us here. But also non-tech companies use SaaS products. SaaS products for email, antivirus, backup, CRM, supply chain, market, the list goes on, right? And chances are those SaaS products are running on infra from the big three. Costs of that infrastructure is then factored into these companies' cost of goods sold, and again, passed on to consumers, as we do, right? And so those consumers are who? Well, they're people who use products from tech and non-tech companies, which is to say everyone. So cloud costs, those margins, are being paid for by society as a whole, even if you're not at all touching technology. Innovation. Stifled. Okay, obviously the cloud providers sell a lot more than raw compute, right? Those high margin value-added services on top make life considerably easier for app developers and DevOps engineers because they abstract away a lot of the drudge work that makes engineers dream of a life of carpentry or just living in a tree forever. For example, AWS Elastic Cache provides on-demand caching. It's relatively easy to spin up, relatively easy to scale. GCP's Dataproc is a managed service that, again, makes processing and dealing with large data sets easier, especially on on-demand infra. The thing is, these products were built on top of already existing open source projects. Elastic Cache is a wrapper around Redis, and Dataproc is basically managed Spark. Right? Redis Labs maintains Redis, and Databricks maintains the Spark project. And not only have they not been incentivized for this for-profit usage, but they have to operate in an environment where the cloud providers have an overwhelming advantage in terms of scale without any contribution to the community. So Databricks, Redis Labs are relegated to kind of a second-tier level where they're offering professional services, and they're effectively sales channels for the providers, right? Okay, I think, I don't know, but I'm guessing Databricks would love to offer its own hosted Spark, but they can't, because they can't compete with GCP offering Dataproc on top of its own infrastructure, obviously at cost. And so when a hyperscale provider can pick up an open source project, develop a very successful product on top of it, not make any contribution, or not much, not proportional, I should say, contribution back to the community, that also provides a powerful disincentive for contributors to those open source projects, right? And as in biology, an ecosystem without diversity, without active cross-fertilization withers. If you buy into my first three arguments, then I got some bad news for you. It's getting worse, right? According to Gartner, the cloud services sector is growing at a 23% compound annual growth rate. Okay, no signs of slowing. We're deep in a long-term trend of workloads moving from wholly owned or leased hardware to on-demand infrastructure. To paraphrase, cloud is eating the world. And meanwhile, don't look for any new cloud providers to come online. That game is over. The big providers have effectively built competitive moats in the form of their hyperscale data centers, right? They have spent tens of billions of dollars achieving economies of scale that make it effectively impossible for new players to compete. Alibaba aside, few companies in this world have the money necessary to compete effectively, to sink billions of dollars into a new market for them. Imagine being at the board meeting, being like, yeah, we need $3 billion to go head to head against Amazon in the game they created. Oh yeah, and Google too, Microsoft. Like it's not a winning proposition, right? So here we are. Nope. To the extent that big providers control cloud compute, where the apps that run our economy are run, where the data that those apps generate is stored, that control, I'd argue, over, if you will, the means of production, little reference, little callback there. Control over the means of production will worsen over time, right? And I'll argue that it's going to accelerate soon as IoT devices, autonomous vehicles, sensors, and other near-edge use cases start to push massive amounts of data and really start to get into mainstream. So what recourse do we have? Well, assuming we don't want to just embrace the current trend and all go get a job at Amazon, valid alternative. What are the solutions to the four core problems that I laid out? Well, we could stop using cloud. That's valid. Put some blades in the closet, brush up on our bash skills, and spend the rest of our lives doing sysadmin. No, cloud is here to stay. It's great. Cloud's awesome. We could take to the streets like they did. You saw the picture. But I would argue that cloud costs are like down around number 100 of the list of things we need to take to the streets about. So no. So what's left? Government regulation. Bring it on. Nah, probably not great. Vigorous government regulation, right? No. Please, God, no. But what if there was a different path? And folks, I'm here to tell you there is a different path. And unsurprisingly, it's decentralization, right? See, while cloud is huge and growing, there's still a huge number of servers in colo and on-prem data centers that are privately owned. They're not cloud. They're just sitting there. They belong to companies like P&G, Coca-Cola. Intuit runs QuickBooks and TurboTax out of data center hardware that they own, right? And here's the thing. Most of the time, most of those servers are idle. There's sunk capital costs just sitting there doing nothing, except looking like ripe targets for decommissioning in somebody's cloud migration strategy. There's a 2015 Stanford study that I love that estimated that 10 million servers worldwide are comatose, and they define comatose as being on, powered up, but not having processed anything or not having stored anything in 6 months. 6 months. Like my definition of an idle server is something that hasn't processed. I have a liberal definition. If you haven't processed something for a week, then you're idle, right? And so there's 10 million that haven't processed anything for 6+ months. That 10 million servers is something like $28 billion of capital investment just sitting there, not doing anything. And they're not concentrated in a few hyperscale data centers either. They're all over the place, from Alaska to Zambia, right? And so what if there was a way to unlock all that latent capacity and make it available for people to deploy to, just like they deploy to EC2. What would happen when a large number of companies bid to host a workload instead of a developer choosing from among 3 providers and going through the calculator to figure out what price will be offered to him or her? And what would the knock-on effects be in the real world when compute is treated like the commodity it is and should be, and real competition and real price transparency drive down costs? And these are the questions that excite us at Overclock Labs. Boom. This is why I come into work every day. Right? This is what drives me, and it provides a hell of a motivation to do my best and make this project succeed. Akash, this is the company this is our project. Overclock Labs, Akash.Network. We're one way. It's not a pitch, so I didn't want to pitch. I'm just gonna spend 1 second describing what we do. We're one way. What we do is we have a blockchain-based marketplace that connects all those companies with the idle server capacity with other companies that want to deploy to them. There's a programmatic auction process, and boop, low bid wins. Piece of cake. And then everything goes off-chain, and deployment happens with Docker containers. It's orchestrated by Kubernetes, and the hosting fees are paid in our native token. Yay us. Okay, so a marketplace like Akash is one way to achieve what I'm calling this moral imperative. Sidestepping an oligopoly's current and growing chokehold on one of society's most elemental building blocks. But we're not the only way. There's other projects out there. Take a look, I won't pitch them. Okay, Gollum, they do a different thing. They're great too. We're a startup too. We're a San Francisco startup. I'm sort of clear-eyed about our chances for success. We're going for it, but we're a startup, like I said. Doesn't matter. The problem is bigger than Akash. The problem is bigger than any one company. The problem will be solved, whether it's solved by us or somebody else, because solving it is imperative. Thank you. Do we take questions, or is that it? I don't know. If anybody's got questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah.
Have you guys looked at utilizing IBM mainframes?
We have not. We've thought about it. We haven't done any work. That's actually really interesting to us. Our platform, our deployment platform, is pretty tightly bound to Docker and Kubernetes. So that would be sort of a next shift, next phase shift. Sure. Anybody else? The audience is completely dark, so just shout it. I can't. Oh, now I can.
So you talked about cloud computing, but can you talk about more about the edge computing?
Yeah, the edge computing case is great. From our rollout perspective, we're going to start with cloud because it's the easiest thing. But there's idle server. So our platform is basically an OS, right? So from the deployment perspective, it's an OS. Any system that you can install a Linux OS on can be part of this network. And so we've had conversations with folks basically to get our to get the Akash agent out to cell phone towers, to get to the server capacity in cell phone towers and other near edge, I wouldn't call it true edge devices, but because because Akash is this decentralized marketplace, the physical location of the servers doesn't matter, and you can choose, when you deploy, you can choose the region or geography that you want to deploy to. So really folding those edge devices into the network is going to be huge for us. It's a natural, because the providers have to have these hyperscale data centers, right? Now, Amazon's got 14 or something of them now. That's awesome, and it's a lot of use cases, but it really doesn't really help with when you have autonomous vehicles sending shit tons of data to an entity that needs to be nearby with low latency to compute it.